Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all. Thank you all for the opportunity and for the invitation. It's great to be here. Great to join you. And talk. I love these new podcasts. I feel like it's we're evolving from the world of radio and TV to now.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done a podcast, but this might be my first podcast.
Really?
Hey,
Yeah.
Awesome, man.
it's an honor.
Thank you.
Honor to have you, man. And congratulations for the win.
Thank you. I appreciate
That's
it.
awesome. I know you guys worked really hard on that.
Absolutely. And like I tell everybody, ultimately, it's not necessarily a win for us. It's a win for the voters of District 6 that voted for us, who wanted somebody who'd be an advocate for them. And like I said from day one, it's somebody to advocate for the residents, the small businesses, and the senior citizens in our district, which is probably one of the districts with the largest number of senior citizens.
We met at the Costex building a few months ago, and hearing you speak, both George and I came away from that meeting instantly knowing that you were prepared, articulate. You were the guy. You were going to win. It was kind of obvious.
Yeah, we were confident you're going to win for sure. We're like, yeah, that's the guy.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys
gonna
were.
win.
We were nervous there until the last day.
We were confident. Yeah, he's going to win.
And through watching all the interviews I could find last night, the thing that stuck out was that preparedness. You know the issues backwards and forwards. But not only that, how you present your ideas is very concise, very clear. So I wanted to see if you could touch on how you prepared for that side of this job, and also what that process looks like. Because a lot of people are not in politics. They don't know what goes into it. So I think we can get a lot of insight from.
So honestly, one of the biggest, I say, things that's helped me in all of this is I've worked on a lot of campaigns in the past. I've managed a lot of campaigns. I've done a lot of interviews, and it's one of those things that practice makes perfect, right? And I don't think I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the more interviews you do, whether it be radio, TV, or podcast, I think the better you get at it, and the more comfortable you feel, and the more comfortable you feel in articulating your message. And I think a lot of times, candidates, politicians, and so on, they get a little stuck in trying to, change up their message every single time. Having worked on campaigns and understanding messaging, I think the best way that you make sure your message gets to voters and that they retain it is to make sure that it's consistent and concise. So it's about making sure that you have a message that's consistent, concise, that you are able to, to articulate it in a very efficient manner.
Now, when you first started on the campaign trail, how were you prepping the issues? Because there's a lot of the same questions come up, based around the platform you're running on. Did you practice in the mirror? Practice with your wife, your friends, everyone?
So I'm a bit of a kind of a nerd and kind of a wonk when it comes to this sort of stuff. I start off my day reading all sorts of different news aggregators. I probably will read, by the time 9 a.m. comes around, maybe 20, 30 articles. And I, throughout the day, whether it be Twitter or other things that folks send my way, I try my best to stay apprised of all the different things that are happening, local, state, and federal. Just because I'd say, I'm sort of a news junkie per se, right? I like knowing, and knowing why this, knowing the particulars as well. Like, why is this issue so important? Why is it not? What are the details regarding this? I'm one of these people that'll go on a Wikipedia, spiral, that you'll start off on one thing, and then before you know it, you're like 15 pages later. You've just spiraled into this deep hole of searching different things and learning different things on.
That's kind of how we are in the commercial real estate realm. We just start.
Yeah.
By the time 9 a.m. comes, man, I'm reading articles, what traded, what sold. So.
And I think that's honestly, reading is so important. I think that's one of the best ways to learn. One of the best ways to to stay informed, and I think it keeps you sharp and on your feet. And I enjoy. I don't read as many physical books as I'd like, but I am a big reader of articles and of different of now what do they call these? The ebooks, I suppose, is the name.
Yeah.
Of that, because I think it's become so much easier having. We're also tied to our phones, right? We've got our phones. We check our phones more than anything else. I feel like throughout our day. So I'm a big avid believer in reading and consuming a lot of information, because I think the more information you have, the more the better position or the better decision that you can make.
Mm-hmm. And did you do debate in high school and run for office in high school?
I didn't actually. I worked full time since I was 16 years old. At 16, actually, I had 2 jobs. I don't come from a wealthy family, so if you wanted to, go out with your friends, you wanted to have a car, you wanted to have all these things, you had to work. So at a very young age, I started working. In school, I was a work experience, so you'd get credits for those sorts of things. My first job was at CVS Pharmacy. And I worked there and at Blockbuster at the same time.
Blockbuster.
Blockbuster,
Wow.
which
Taking
I
us
know for
back,
some
man.
folks, that's a blast from the past.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Talking about, I guess, where you went to school. Where'd you tell our viewers where you went to school and where you grew up?
So I know in Miami, right, the popular thing to say is Belen, Columbus, or one of those.
It was a public school, man.
But I went to South Miami Senior High.
South Miami.
Now I guess I could say, notable alumni, Senator
Cobras.
Rubio and myself. I'm a very distant second. But I went to South Miami Senior High. I think it's a fabulous school. It's a phenomenal school. And I think that the public school system has a lot to offer our community. And I am a big believer in what they do.
That's awesome.
On the public school, what do you see, in your coming tenure on the board? What do you see for changes or improvements that could be made for the?
Well, I don't think we do a whole lot when it comes to schools, right? Because you've got the school board that really handles school, and the state, which does laws and regulations and curriculum. But that's something that I'd have to see as to. I know regarding zoning and those sorts of things. We can work together, but I'm not sure as to how much we can actually effectuate change from the county commission. But what I will tell you is that as a conservative and as a big believer in choice and school choice, I had the privilege of going to West Lab, which was one of the first schools of choice here in Miami-Dade County. They partnered with the University of Miami. They're actually on the back side of their campus. It was an elementary school, very small classroom sizes. It was a phenomenal school. I remember back then it was a lottery. My mom signed up my brother and I when she was just still pregnant with us. And we got the ability to go there, and it was a phenomenal school. And I think that, it was a very good experience. And I think it displays, the value in schools of choice and in having a phenomenal school like West Lab.
Kev, let me ask you, who's had the most influence in your career?
It's hard to say, right? Because you look at life, you look at career, and you want to kind of like blend it all together. But I'd say there's 2 people probably that have had a significant influence in life and career. In life, I would say it was my grandmother. I think, seeing, folks come from Cuba, the struggle they go through, having had it all over there, and then, losing it all and having to start over. I think that, gives you incredible perspective as to the importance of democracy, the importance of elections, the importance of advocating for freedom and capitalist policies. And sort of similar, but on the political side, somebody who has been a kind of a great inspiration, and whenever I need, I need good advice, has been Max Alvarez. Some folks that saw him when he spoke at the RNC.
Max from Sunshine, right?
Yes, he started off selling fruits out of the back of his truck.
Really?
Wow.
And today, obviously, he's got the company he has, and it's because of his hard work. And he'll tell you, never chase the dollar, chase the dream. Because eventually, if you chase your dreams and you're happy at what you do, money will eventually follow you. And I think it's a good perspective to have in life, because sometimes folks get so caught up in making more money or just this and that, and they forget to actually follow their dreams and do what it is that they want to do.
Yeah, that couldn't be more true, man. I tell the guys all the time, like, focus on helping people, focus on giving, and the money's gonna come.
Yeah, well,
Like-
and the same thing, do good and don't expect nothing back, right?
Exactly.
Don't do good so that you're recognized or any of these sorts of things.
Right.
I know plenty of elected officials that do a lot of good in our community, that are involved and help people when they can't pay their, if they can't pay their rent or they have a death in the family, what have you, and you'll never see it on social media. And they do it because it's the right thing to do. And I think ultimately that's what being a public servant should be about doing good and not necessarily expecting any sort of gratitude or reward.
What's your opinion right now on the current state of the economy?
I think we can all agree that the inflation is out of hand, right? The housing market is kind of out of control as well. Gas, it's not in a good place right now, which it also makes it a little bit tricky, right? Because you look at the job numbers and all these other stuff, and there's a little bit of confusion in the economy, but ultimately, When you have an economy where folks are paying more every day for food, for gas, for insurance, for taxes, that's not a good thing. And I think one of the big things that we've got to do is make sure that we, I think ultimately people know best what to do with their money, and people know, I believe in folks to do the best decisions for their families, which is why I think that we should always strive to put more money back in their pockets as opposed to in government.
100%.
Now, touching on the economy, growth, jobs, housing, to bring it more local, the South Dade Logistics and Technology Center was just approved, I think last week, maybe this week, with a overturn of Merkava's veto. So what I wanted to use that as a stepping stone for was, with a project like that, 5.9 million square feet of industrial coming to an area that does not have a project like that to speak of. What are the steps that you think the county can take to make sure that the transportation is there for that workforce, that the housing is available? Because it's going to bring thousands of jobs to the area, which is desperately needed. But there also needs to be infrastructure to support that.
Absolutely, and listen, I did not have the honor of being there. We hadn't been elected yet, right? Of knowing, of having the staff analysis and all these sorts of things to kind of come, really analyze that project. But nonetheless, it's the law of the land, as they say, right? It's been passed. So I think our number one responsibility is to make sure it is implemented in a way that makes sure that we have the necessary transportation, the necessary infrastructure, our roads, the sewer, making sure that we have everything that's necessary to make sure that it is successful. Because if it is now going to happen, let's make sure it happens right. And I think part of that is making sure that we also, as a conservative, I think you have to be a conservative in every sense of the word, including the environment, right? Because we get our water from the environment, right? We live off of the environment. So if we destroy the environment, then clearly, we'd be messing up that chain. So I think we've got to make sure that we take a very holistic approach now as this is implemented, and making sure that we are being good stewards of the environment, making sure there's the necessary infrastructure including transportation, to make sure that it is successful. And this is now what's going to be the law of the land.
And what does that look like mechanically you can use, I'm just using this as an example because it's a pretty dramatic change that's recently happened, but you can use this to talk about other areas of the county. What does that look like in terms of, changing zoning to higher densities, the type of transportation changes you want to make, what type of vehicles are people going to be using? There's a lot to. So
transportation to me is very important. One of the reasons that I said on day one that I was running was because as somebody who rode the public bus system, the Miami-Dade Transit, for 4.5 years in high school, I used to take the bus home every single day, and the bus usually was late for a variety of, for whatever reason it was. They had broken down or whatever. I think we have phenomenal employees at the county, but I think that we need to make sure they have the necessary tools to be successful. And that's where I come in with the half penny. Almost 2 decades ago, we passed the half penny surtax, the People's Transportation Trust, for new capital projects. If you guys remember, is what was promised. But yet, for years and years and years, they used it to pay for existing transportation. And Mayor Jimenez started shifting that to make sure that it would go back to its original intended use. And Mayor Cava has continued that. But what it tells you is a story of millions and millions of dollars that was squandered and pillaged on operating funds that should have been used to expand our transportation, right? Had we used that money properly, we wouldn't be sitting here today still talking about when are we going to build the North Corridor. It probably would have been built. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about what transportation are we going to do down US 1. It probably would have been built. And I think that is what's so important now is not having, having term limits, is that there's a sense of urgency. Because I think, for many years, what we saw was a lot of issues would continue on and on and on and wouldn't really reach a resolution. And I think now you're finding folks who are coming in with I think new and fresh ideas, and that really want to get things done. We don't necessarily want to have to sit here and wait for the bureaucracy. We want to make sure that things are getting done and that they're getting done efficiently and fast.
So it sounds like with the half penny argument, it sounds like the the want is there for better transportation, but the execution just has not.
The execution has been terrible, right? I think when you look at the halfpenny, I don't know anybody who could argue the execution hasn't been terrible. And just because it's legal doesn't make it right that you can transfer these dollars, right? It was very clear what was on the ballot. It was very clear what they were selling to the voters 20 some odd years ago. But then what's not clear is why you've decided that now this money should then be taken from Peter to give to Paul, right? That's not right. And I think that should have never happened. And we have to make sure that it never happens again, because all of these sources that we have of transportation money, we've got to make sure we're using it so that we can implement mass transit throughout Miami-Dade County. So make sure that we can continue to implement the SMART plan. Miami-Dade County, you've got folks moving here from all over the world, all over the United States. If we don't get up to speed with, no pun intended, with mass transit and making sure that we're a global city, we're going to be the next Los Angeles where you're spending 2 to 3 hours a day in traffic.
That leads to my next question with the Miami Freedom Park. It's in your district. It's a huge stadium that's going to be built there. I mean, that golf course has been there for years. How do you see that impacting your district?
Well, ultimately, I think what's most important there is that there was a vote, right? There was a vote, and overwhelmingly the voters supported this new idea, which I think is a very important thing to note, because one thing you'll find for me is that, similar to what I was saying with the halfpenny, is, to me, voter intent is very important. The voters were asked if they wanted this stadium. They said that they, by an overwhelming amount, I think it was over 60%, that they wanted it. So I think now it is our job to implement their will. And I think that there's going to be more things there in addition to the stadium. I think there'll be job opportunities. There'll be all sorts of different things. And I think it could be it can be an economic engine for our county.
As far as transportation, going back to that same topic, how do you see that impacting?
What's good is that you've got the 836 right next to it.
Yeah, it's right in the center, so there's a lot of thoroughfares there.
And you're next to the intermodal center.
Yeah.
Intermodal center, I apologize. Mm-hmm. So you've got different modes of transportation that are right next door. I'd have to look at the plans. I don't know if there's. I would venture to say that there probably are plans to make sure that we're making the best use of it being next to the intermodal center, so that you can make sure folks can come on the train, leave on the train, or on buses, or what have you. But I do think that in terms of transportation, it is surrounded definitely with a good set of options for folks that want to egress and degress for the stadium.
Just to backtrack a little bit, in case our viewers don't know, you're District 6. Can you tell them what areas, what cities you're covering there?
Absolutely. So it's fairly large, and the lines, they're a little squiggly at times. So we start off in Southeast Hialeah, essentially south of Hialeah Park. Although we have on the left and the right of it, we've got a little bit of the district as well. But essentially south of Hialeah Park, between the Palmetto and 37th Avenue. You go coming down, you have all of, you got the airport in its entirety. You got Miami Springs, Virginia Gardens, Flagami, Grapeland.
Flagami, I went to school to Flagami.
You've got northern Coral Gables, pretty much north of Coral Way. And then you have 67th Avenue and the Palmetto all the way down to the Snapper Creek Expressway. So you have Glenver Heights as well. You have West Miami, Shenley Park, Coral Terrace, in addition to Malls of the Americas and Northern Fontainebleau. So it's very diverse, very large.
Wow.
And it's exciting because you get to, you meet folks from so many different walks of life in District 6, and to me it's exciting to be able to help and be a resource for all these different individuals.
So you said in an interview that you knocked on 7,000 doors.
Over 7,000.
Over 7,000.
I think it was like 7,100 and something.
7,000 doors.
Yeah.
So
I don't think we've done that combined.
As industrial brokers, that's part of our prospecting, making cold calls, knocking on doors. So the idea of knocking on over 7,000 doors is like, we thought we had good numbers. That puts us to shame.
So every single day, you just got, you got to be out there, and that's what we were doing, taking our message directly to the voters. And those are 7,000 doors that I knocked on. We had a team of folks.
That should be a motivation to all the industrial real estate brokers out there. You have
Run
Kevin
for
Cabrera.
office.
Yeah, run for office. Knock on doors like Kevin.
And I think the best part about the campaign, in my opinion, was knocking on doors. It's the hardest part, but it's the best part.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. Because when you sit on somebody's couch in their living room, and you're able to connect with a voter and hear about the issues that they care about, the issues that are affecting them, what would make their life easier. There's no poll, there's no commercial, there's no sample size or anything else that you can do that will provide you that raw kind of information that you're getting directly from the voters. So in my opinion, the value is priceless. Yeah. To be able to sit there, talk to a voter, and be able to hear directly from them what they're facing and and different things that you could do to make their lives easier.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. When I first started real estate and commercial, one thing was phone calls, the other thing was knocking on doors. I leaned towards knocking on doors first. It was the connection.
It's hard. Listen, the amount of people that I would be at the poll precinct, and they'd come to vote, and they'd say, "No, you knocked on my door." A lot of them I remembered. I don't know if I remember all 7,000 to be fair, but you do have some memorable conversations with folks.
Yeah.
Right. So you remember that, and it's hard when somebody meets you, when they commit to voting for you, and when they shake your hand and say, "You've got my support." In my opinion, you've got their support, and those people are with you no matter what.
Yeah, for sure. Let's touch up on what are the top 3 things that you want to work on once you get sworn in.
So the top 3 things have kind of remained consistent since we launched. Number one is kind of one of the main reasons why I ran in the first place: building and permitting. My wife and I purchased a home, and it took us 7.5 months to do a septic to sewer conversion. So I think we've got to figure out a way, at places like Jacksonville, you can get your permits in 30 days, or a punch list that doesn't change.
1,000%.
We've got to make sure that we can do it in a place like Miami. Number 2 is taxes. The number one issue that voters told me, particularly retired voters, was that they couldn't continue to afford their property taxes increasing year after year while their fixed income, whether it be a 401k, a pension, Social Security, does not increase. So I think we've got to find a way to provide relief. I've always, the group that I was trying to figure out a way so we could freeze property taxes would be folks that are over 65, have lived in their homes for more than 30 years, and the home is below a certain value, to make sure that it's targeted and we're helping folks that actually need the help. And we say the 30 years because we live in Miami, and I want to make sure that nobody's selling their house to their aunt or their uncle who's retired, so they don't have to, so their property taxes are frozen. So I'd like, and maybe that's not the perfect solution, but I'd like to find a way to work with my colleagues and work with the mayor to provide relief for homeowners on property taxes, particularly those that are retired.
Can you walk us through, I think a lot of people that watching this probably don't spend as much time with local politics as they should. Can you walk us through how you, as a commissioner, get something in front of the board, get it passed, the process of politics at the local level?
Well, the first thing you got to do is figure out what it is you want to do, right? And get the ordinance and legalese and what have you, and draft it. You might want to get some analysis of or something along those lines to make sure that you have backup info to make your case, and then ultimately you bring it before the board. And as we like to joke, is you got to be able to count to 7, right? Because you need 7 votes. There's 13 of us, and you might have to count to 9 if you don't have the mayor, right? So it's pretty basic. Is you have to be able to come up with an idea, draft it, articulate it in a way that you can convince 7 of your 13 colleagues to go with you. And obviously all within, a public setting, as we know, sunshine and all these things, you're not allowed to have these talks behind closed doors. It has to be, in a board meeting. So it's about making sure that you craft good legislation that folks can be, they can come on board with, and then, making sure that you can also, have the mayor's support as well.
Let me ask you, how easy or how difficult is it for, let's say, one of your constituents to come and speak with you in person? Is it difficult? Because I know, like, for example, the mayor of the Gables, right? I think he has a certain...
his office hours.
His office hours, yeah, which is great. I mean, I think that's awesome.
So we plan on doing something similar. It's fairly simple right now. I've had plenty of people reach out to me on Instagram, on Twitter, on whatever it may be. I run all my own social media. Nobody really does it for me. Sometimes we get suggestions on captions, but I'm the one that actually goes in and posts everything. And if somebody reaches out to me, as many have, I'm happy to talk to them, and I've called plenty of them and try to see how we can help them out. There's plenty of people that have my cell phone number. I've had the same cell phone number, I think, for I don't know how many years, maybe 15 years, if not more. I'm not planning on changing it.
That's awesome.
And if anybody reaches out to me, I pride myself on returning everybody's phone call, answering every text, and making sure that we provide excellent service to every single constituent.
That's huge to hear, because I know the first time I went to a board meeting, you walk in and you see the 13 commissioners, like these guys, these people are untouchable. And,
Right.
And there's a big separation between the public, at least, on my side, being in Joe Public, it's seemingly there's a huge separation. So to hear you say that you're opening yourself up to office hours potentially, and you're in the weeds, it's a big sign.
What I said time and time again, and I'll say it to our team, is the ordinances you pass, the things you vote on, all of that's important. But the most important thing is how you help your constituents. And when they call you because they have a need and they're turning to you because they don't have anyone else to turn to, you've got to make sure that you can deliver. Now, are the results always going to be favorable? Maybe not. But you've got to make sure that you put in the effort and the time to get them the best possible outcome for whatever issue is that they're facing. And like I've told everybody, the worst thing anybody could ever say is we called your office and nobody called us back. And having worked in constituent services, having set up constituent services for other elected officials, to me it's the most important thing that we have, to making sure we have a presence in the community, to making sure that we are accessible, and making sure that when people reach out, they get meaningful and effective service.
Can you speak to the thought process behind, on your part, after you have started, you're running on those 3 items that we talked about. Now, when you're getting feedback from the public, I imagine it's a barrage of requests. Anything from they didn't pick up my trash today, or something was left on the side of the road, to really big zoning issues. No, I don't want this in my neighborhood. How do you discern what to focus on?
Well, it really comes down to having a good team behind you that can help you put all of that together, so that you can see the different issues that constituents are bringing up, and making sure that you're being an effective voice advocating on their behalf. And different parts of the district have different issues, right? And it's making sure that you have a level of customer service, because ultimately that's, in a way, they are customers of the office, and you got to treat them with the best customer service as possible, right? You've got to make sure that, I'm a big believer in self-surveys, right? I think that every single person that interacts with our office should get a survey, so that they can rate, the level of service that they received. Because our number one priority, as I said earlier, it's got to be to deliver excellent service to every single person that we interact with.
That's great. That's great. Kevin, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I don't know. That people were asking me that before we won, and I used to tell them we got to win.
Man.
And I was telling them we got to win first. I don't know. Today, we're taking officially office on Tuesday, and we'll go from there. We'll see where life takes us. I didn't necessarily, see myself in this position either. It was kind of an interesting scenario where there was a person that was running. He ended up leaving to run for something else, and this all kind of came about and happened within 6 months.
That's great. That's great. All right, we're going a little bit macro right now on immigration reform. I know it's above your scope, but how do you feel about immigration reform?
Well, I think first of all we got to.
What's your opinion on it?
I think first of all we got to acknowledge you have a problem, right? Clearly we have a problem when you have the amount of people crossing the border that we have, and every day it increases. And I think we've got to make sure you've got to find a solution to the problem, but ultimately the first thing you got to do is you've got to fix the border, right? You got to have security. And once you do that, then we can focus on everything else. But it's similar to when you have a leak in your roof, right?
Yeah.
You can't replace the drywall if you haven't fixed the leak on the actual roof.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got to focus on making sure that we have a safe and secure border, and then we can focus on everything else.
Should bring back the wall, right?
Well, it looks like President Biden brought it back already.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that he had restarted building the wall. And I was like, well, that's great. I'm glad he finally came on board.
Your biggest regret?
My biggest regret in life or the campaign?
Let's go with the campaign.
The campaign, I'll tell you, it's our first mail piece. There's all sorts of things I would have done differently. I'm sort of a perfectionist when it comes to these sorts of things. And I've looked at it now, I don't know how many times, and I would have written all sorts of different things. I'm on there and changed things. Now, ultimately, nobody remembers that at this point.
Right.
But in life, I will tell you, and I encourage every person is, I think, maybe not going away to college. I think going away to college provides folks an interesting experience that sometimes you don't get staying at home.
You didn't go all the way to college?
Going away.
Oh, going away for college. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think it provides a different experience. You know, my wife went away for college, and her experience is a little bit different than the one I had. I also had, 2 full-time jobs, so it makes it a little bit more difficult, which is, I think, what makes FIU and Miami-Dade College so phenomenal. The fact that they are so accessible and so easy, to interact with for folks that are commuter students.
Well, if anything, it gave you a great perspective
Yeah.
for how important business and working life is.
Yeah.
And having, because it is a privilege to be able to go away to college. I have family members. I worked all the way through college, and you're right. You see people that don't need to do that, and it's a different experience. Yeah. So I think it speaks to your want for more jobs and the ability to have a flourishing society to send their youth to something like that.
And I probably would have wanted to get involved in student government and stuff like that. I never did it in high school or anything like that. I don't know why. I wouldn't really be able to tell you as to the why, but I do wish I would have done it.
Making up for it now.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on, one thing you've mentioned in the past and earlier today is your focus on the environment. Some will say that being environmentally focused and growth focused are diametrically opposed. It was really inspiring to hear that sounds like you don't hold that position. How do you work between those two goals to make sure that everyone is having a flourishing economic environment, but we also have an environment that we can drink water from?
I think the number one thing is to make sure that different changes that we do, whether it be, considering, what just happened with the UDB or other things, making sure that it's always a thoughtful approach, right? That you see if there's a need, and to make sure that whatever it is you do, it's not because you're always a yes or you're always a no, but because you're putting real thought into it. Like one perfect example where I think that those two intersect is our sewage system, right? Right now we're under a consent decree. And we're under a consent decree because our sewage system and pipes are bursting. And we've taken forever to replace them. And there's many places where businesses can't open because you don't have a sewage system that can service them, or it cannot take more capacity, right? So this is something that's affecting the environment, right? Because you're destroying the environment if you have sewage leaks. And then you can't open more businesses because there's no capacity on the system, right? So making sure that we're investing in our infrastructure, I think is one of the most important things we can do, particularly our sewer system, adhering to the consent decree and fully implementing it to make sure that businesses, one, can open, and two, that we're not just continuing to destroy the environment.
Your wife, I know your wife is also in public service, right?
Yes.
How did you guys both have the same idea? Obviously she was, I think she was in public service before you, obviously, but.
So we met actually on the campaign trail. I was working for one candidate, she was working for another, and we met. We had both gone to speak at the Women's Republican Club to go recruit volunteers or what have you. I swear I was not there to recruit her. And we met there. We went on our first date, and it kind of went great ever since after. And then we got married, and she was elected. She was just reelected now. She was elected in 2020 to the Florida House to represent District 114, and we both have kind of a big spot in our hearts for public service and a yearning to serve and to help our community. And I think that that's an important thing to have, in any folks that are representing you.
That's great. That's great. I think there's one more that I have here. What's one advice or one tip you would give an 18-year-old that wants to be in public service and one day be
So people ask me this all the time. They ask me this all the time. Well, how did you get here? How did you become President Trump's state director? How did you do this? How did you do that? And I said, become a volunteer. Campaigns and politics, there's really not an application, right? You don't show up at a campaign and say, hey, where do I sign up online, for this job opening?
Right.
My first job in politics, I volunteered. I volunteered for about 2 months. I got offered a job, and before I knew it, I was, knee deep in politics and going ahead. But I would say to find an issue, find a candidate, find a race, whatever it may be that interests you, that piques your interest, and get involved. Call them up, contact them, social media, and become a volunteer. And that is the best way to get involved. I started off in 2014 as a volunteer, and today I have the honor and the privilege of being elected as the next county commissioner for District 6.
Last question. How do you get more people involved in local politics and fired up and enthusiastic and wanting to be involved?
So that's a good question, and I think it goes to making sure that, I think one of the groups that we got to make sure we try to get involved is the youth, right? Making sure that we have an active presence on campuses, and trying to get folks. I think some of the new civics curriculum that they passed in the state is phenomenal, right? First thing you want is to make sure that they know about government, that they know that there's a local government, a state government, a federal government. A lot of folks don't know that, right? So I think most importantly is to make sure that they have kind of a foundation of knowledge of government, and then make sure that we're doing events on campus, trying to get folks to volunteer and to get involved, because I think it's so important to be involved as part of your government. It's one of the, I tell people, if you don't get involved, you can't complain, right? You got to get involved so that you can be part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This one holds near and dear to my heart, especially because I'm a Christian. And where do you stand on putting God back in schools, or God in schools in general?
Well,
how do you feel about that?
So I'm not a school board member, nor do we have really any sort of jurisdiction there.
Right.
But I do think that we've got to. I think a lot of the things that we're seeing now in society, that are consequent of kind of the loss of family values. And I think it's important that we bring family values back. It's important that we protect kind of the innocence of children, and make sure that whatever your God may be, that's fine. But we shouldn't be saying that it's reprehensible or this or that. I think we got to be respectful of each other, respectful of each other's views, orientations, and all these sorts of things. But it's got to apply the same for both sides.
Awesome, great.
Kevin,
man, appreciate it. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you, guys.
Commissioner Cabrera.
Thank you so much. So you can follow us in Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at KM Cabrera FL.
Great. And go ahead and subscribe, hit that bell, and share with your friends. Commissioner Cabrera.